World War I scarred Europe for 4 horrific years between 1914 and 1918. Today, countless cemeteries testify to the terrible price that was paid. The spark that led to all-out war was the assassination of the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne in Sarajevo on the 28th of June, 1914. Europe's great powers began to mobilize their armies. One aggressive step led to another, and with no side wanting to back down, a month later, Europe was plunged into war. When Germany invaded Belgium en route to France on the 4th of August 1914, Britain declared war in defense of its allies. Just over a fortnight later, the two countries' armies clashed for the first time at Mons in Belgium. A few hundred of the British and German soldiers who died in that first of so many battles are buried here in this beautiful cemetery just outside of Mons. The German and British dead lying side by side. In the next 4 years of war, there wouldn't be hundreds of dead to mourn. There'd be millions. In this Globe Trekker special, I visit key World War I locations on the Western Front, in northern France and Belgium. From Meaux, the closest the war got to Paris, I head to the Aisne, where trench warfare began. Moving on to Ypres and Poperinge in Belgium, I visit the battlefields of Verdun, Vauquois, the Somme, and Fromelles. From Cambrai, where tanks came of age, I traveled to La Ferté-Alais to see the world's first warplanes. Seeing where the Hindenburg Line was broken near Saint-Quentin, I end my trip at Mons in Belgium. My journey begins in the small city of Meaux, just 25 miles east of Paris. Renowned today for its fine brie and mustard, in early September 1914, Meaux had a much bigger claim to fame. During the invasion of Belgium, the German army had quickly crushed Belgian, French, and British resistance. With the Allies in headlong retreat, it seemed Germany would capture Paris and win the war within days. But with the German supply line now overextended, the French mounted a last-ditch counterattack to try to save Paris. One of the most crucial battles on the front took place just outside Meaux. Whilst many of Meaux's population fled in the face of the German advance, the Bishop of Meaux insisted on staying at his post in the cathedral to rally the French troops and pray for victory, in case of which he promised to erect a monument in thanks to God. Here, just outside of Meaux, is the monument the bishop promised to build if Meaux, and ultimately Paris, just a few miles beyond, was spared from German occupation. And look, there's the baby Jesus' hand outstretched as if to say, stop! In the inscription, Tu n'iras pas plus loin. You will go no further. And they didn't. This is as far as the Germans got before they were forced to retreat. God, it seems, had answered the bishop's prayers. Actually, of course, it was France's soldiers who did the hard and deadly work holding the Germans back. Just a couple of miles or so from the bishop's monument, some of the fiercest fighting took place in the village of Chambry. Just over here, there's a really unusual reminder of the ferocious battle that took place in and around Chambry in early September 1914. These holes in the wall were made by the Germans who occupied Chambry, and they used this high-walled village cemetery as an easily defended position to fight off the attacking French. The Germans shooting through here were overwhelmed by the French, who then turned around and used these same holes as firing positions against German counterattacks. Today, these holes have been left here unrepaired as a reminder of the sacrifice made by the soldiers who died here protecting France. Soldiers who die in battle are generally buried in military cemeteries, but some of those who were killed here in the village cemetery are buried where they fell. Just 10 or so soldiers, many of them French, Moroccans, and Algerians, lie buried here. But the overall death toll in September 1914, from all the battles along the 100-mile front of the Battle of the Marne, was huge. About 150,000 were killed on all sides. To get a better idea of what battle was like on the front lines in 1914, I head to the newly opened Museum of the Great War in Meaux. I'm given a tour by museum guide Stéphane Jonard. The museum has a large collection of the uniforms that the various armies wore in battle in 1914. The French soldiers in particular looked as if they were on parade.
Well, as you can see, those uniforms were not fit for war. With the red trousers.
Yeah, they're like walking targets. Look at me, I'm over here in red.
Exactly. No idea about camouflage. You got no helmets, you got a cavalry sword. It's like going back to Napoleonic times.
Yeah, I mean, they had no idea what kind of warfare they're going into, but it ended up being a much more modern one than they thought, huh? In 1914, not only were soldiers fighting in outdated uniforms, but their transport and communications were very primitive too. Hundreds of city taxis like this one were commandeered by the French army in the rush to get troops from Paris to the front lines of the Battle of the Marne. Once they got to the front lines, carrier pigeons were the fastest way that soldiers could communicate with HQ.
And here is a columbophile.
What is a columbophile exactly?
Well, actually, it's like a communication truck. You got a pigeon in it. It's amusing to see that in such a modern war, you got still pigeons to communicate with each other. And you got soldiers in it.
Who would have thunk it? In 1915, the French army finally issued all of its soldiers with a slightly more camouflaged blue uniform and helmets. But like troops on all sides, armed with only bayonets, they were still expected to charge against trenches protected with machine guns. So what they were up against was trench warfare, but it was much more modern and industrial than they thought, right?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, it's like a transition conflict. You just enter into the 20th century. You started the war with a single-action rifle, and then you started to fight each other with machine guns that could shoot almost 1,200 bullets a minute. And we started to invent the first grenade launchers.
That's a grenade gun?
Yeah.
You're shooting grenades from the gun.
Yeah, that's...
I didn't even know about that. Between 1914 and 1918, not only did the firepower of weapons increase massively, but the number produced grew exponentially as well. Propaganda campaigns, which raised huge amounts of money from the general public, helped finance the industrialization of war. After their defeat at the Battle of the Marne, the German army retreated east to the River Aisne, where there was an easily defendable high ridge. At key locations such as Vendresse and Confricourt, the Germans dug in to fight the pursuing French and British armies. At Confricourt, I'm shown around by local guide Marie-Josée Tessier.
Well, the French army had the greatest difficulty, of course, to cross the river, then climb up the slope and conquer part of the ridge.
Having successfully captured the ridge, the French then took shelter in a warren of pre-existing limestone quarries. Over the next 4 years, under siege from the German front lines just a few hundred yards away, the French remained in the quarries. Today, they're under lock and key to protect the many historic carvings made here by the French troops.
I would like to show you this monument, a very moving one. It says Sergeant Guittard, fallen at this post on the 27th of January 1916.
At this post, right here?
Yes, he was probably on watch near the entrance.
It's incredible. 100 years later, it still looks like it was just carved. From the entrance, we head deeper into what was once the safer part of the quarry, where the majority of the French soldiers lived.
Look, this very peculiar panel, it has been made by a soldier called Victor Brendo in 1970. Here, what he looks most in life, it's written in army slang, jus, rata, and pina, meaning coffee, food, generally not very good, and wine, of course.
All the essentials. That's funny.
And we have here, of course, the reglementary equipment, the cup for jus, the coffee, this for the food, and the flask for wine.
They were given how much wine a day?
Oh, from 1 liter to 1.5 liters per day.
A day?
Yeah, and before every attack, they were given brandy.
So they were going on to the battlefield drunk.
Could be.
Another way that the soldiers found strength before going into battle was by praying at a chapel that had been carved in the quarry when it was first captured.
You can see there, so there is a symbol of the light of God, the rising sun, and God protect France.
It really is comforting in this cold cave. We've got this here, and it's like everything's going to be okay.
Religion was such a relief, it was a hope for them. They were confronted to death every day, weren't they? Mm-hmm. Just next to the altar, there are stairs leading to the front line, and of course, whenever they had to go and fight, there's certainly a prayer here for God to protect them, and on the way back, to thank God to be still alive. When I'm here, I often like to lit a few candles in memory of them.
Yeah, sure.
Because I have the feeling that somehow the spirit of this boy fallen here is still there. And these candles are sort of tribute for what they have done.
Their lights are still shining long after they're gone. On the same day that the French had first launched their assault on the Confricourt quarries, the British also attacked the German defensive line along the Aisne Ridge at Bondresse. Unlike the French, the British managed to capture the top of the ridge only briefly and were forced to retreat down to the valley due to lack of support. Many British soldiers were killed in the area around this cemetery. Local historian Yves Folland is an expert on the role played in the Battle of the Aisne by the British. I like how intimate it is. It's very tranquil here.
Yes, but beware, you are on the killing fields of the Great War. The British has a custom to bury their dead where they fell. Their objective was just right in front, the high ground position, full of Germans. They had to go over the top. The Germans were just above. They died here.
This was the battleground?
Yes, the killing fields are here, around you. It was butchery. Have a look, cavalry.
Cavalry?
Yes.
So they're coming in here on horses?
Yes, swords against machine guns, horses against machine guns. It was the beginning of the Industrial War, but they didn't know.
Nah.
They belongs to the past.
In the early days of the war, as a result of the old traditions of military honor, a very high percentage of British officers were killed.
As the cemetery is full of officers, and you have a full row of officers. Captain, second lieutenant, captain. Well, they die within days of each other. They were leading their men from the front.
Leading by example.
Yes. British military lost more officers in the first 100 days of the war than during the 100 previous years.
That is astonishing.
Yeah. They had been told war was over at Christmas.
And then it ended up going on a lot longer.
4 more years of fighting in the mud of the trenches. After that, your country was never the same.
Well, hundreds of thousands are dying.
So you have lost here your past and a part of your future.
Following the Battle of the Aisne, the German and Allied armies dug in, creating a 450-mile-long line of trenches from the North Sea all the way to Switzerland, which remained little changed for the next 4 years. Throughout these 4 years, Ypres in Belgium was the location of many of the war's bloodiest battles, as both sides tried to break through the front lines. Geographically, Ypres was just one small sector of the war, but shockingly, between 1914 and 1918, as many as 1.75 million German and Allied soldiers were killed or wounded in the trenches and battlefields around the town. Ypres was so affected by the Great War that to this day, crowds gather at 8 o'clock every evening at the Menin Gate Monument. The traffic is stopped and the buglers play the last post in honor of those who gave their lives. Even if soldiers were lucky enough not to be killed on the front lines, there was still a very good chance that they'd be seriously wounded. If they were, the first place they'd receive treatment was usually in the well-protected bunkers of advanced medical dressing stations, like this one at Essex Farm near Ypres. One of the medics who was working here treating the wounded just behind the front lines was Canadian John McCrae, who wrote probably the most famous poem of World War I. On the 2nd of May, 1915, one of his closest friends was killed and buried in this cemetery just over here. Heartbroken and struck by the poppies that were blooming all around his friend's grave, which were the only flowers thriving in the war-churned Flanders mud, McCrae wrote his poem the very next day. In Flanders fields. In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row. And it ends, if ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. Once published, this poem became very popular, and as a result, ever since, in order to keep faith with those who died, the poppy has been adopted as a symbol of remembrance for those who sacrificed their lives in war. Many of the wounded soldiers who were treated by McCrae at Essex Farm were suffering from injuries caused by a terrible new weapon, poison gas, which had been used for the first time by the Germans just a couple of weeks before McCrae wrote his poem. At Langemarck German Cemetery, from where the Germans launched one of their first gas attacks in April 1915, I meet with Philippe Oosterlink, one of Belgium's leading collectors of First World War memorabilia, including gas masks. This is a German mask here?
German mask, autumn 15.
May I see? It looks fragile, but...
Yeah, it's very fragile.
Yeah.
It's canvas with rubber.
Uh-huh.
Put it very large and put your...
Oh, man. Feeling the bridge on my nose.
And now try to run.
And plus, it's fogging up inside. It makes fighting quite difficult, doesn't it?
Here we have a British mask.
Okay.
It's the beginning of 1917.
Which is better?
It's a little bit better than German, but it's 2 years after. They use a new filter, heavier. The bag should be worn in front of you.
Okay.
Around your neck. On the wrong side, because you have to open it and take quickly the mask out. So the filter is in the pocket.
Inside here. Now it doesn't feel heavy at all.
Yeah.
Take
the helmet off.
Uh-huh.
Put the mask.
And this has a nose clip.
It's a nose clip.
And you've got a snorkel mouthpiece here. This actually makes more sense because the other one is so heavy in your mouth when you're running.
It's a new evolution. But you need more place, and you have to keep always that in front of you.
Yeah. What's this one here?
This one is one of the last version of the German mask.
Oh, this is German again, so same as that.
This one, but evolution.
This is evolved.
In 1918, they make a new gas, arsine. It was a small particle.
Arsine.
So they put an extra filter on the filter.
Ah. You have to keep outdoing the next guy.
It's always the same.
You up the chemicals, you up the defenses.
Okay.
You up the defenses, you up the chemicals. And just when you
same
stop.
as weapons, same as a uniform, same as helmets. And
How effective was gas as a weapon?
only 2% of the soldier died with gas.
Oh, okay.
No more, because it was too expensive and make too much work to put in display. The German, some officers say, don't use the gas, don't use the gas. Should be a big problem for us, because mostly the wind come on our side.
Yeah.
If the Allied use gas, should be bad for us.
And yet they did it anyway.
Yeah.
Which is kind of ironic. They're the ones that brought the chemicals into the war. It's like they opened Pandora's box.
Sure.
Yeah. In spring 1915, the German High Command had hoped that poison gas would break the stalemate of trench warfare and change the course of the war. But as it didn't, they came up with another plan. Instead of trying to break through the strong Allied defenses along the Western Front, the Germans chose the French city of Verdun to launch a war of attrition. In plain words, to simply kill as many enemy soldiers as possible. The Battle of Verdun began on February 21st, 1916, with an artillery bombardment of more than 1 million shells. It was intended, in the words of the German Chief of Staff, to bleed the French army white, so that France would lose the will to fight and sue for peace. This was once one of the main streets of the village of Fleury, one of 9 villages completely obliterated during the Battle of Verdun. Verdun was the longest continuous all-out battle of World War I, and in its 9 months of ferocious fighting, Fleury exchanged hands between the French and the Germans as many as 16 times. Today, all that's left are a few signs where buildings once stood. Look, here's where the bakery would have been. The city of Verdun itself, less than 5 miles from Fleury, was very strongly defended by many powerful forts strategically situated on the surrounding high ground. Despite attack by huge numbers of German troops and overwhelming firepower, the French defenders of Verdun refused to give way. The valiant week-long defense of Fort Vaux, in particular, is still renowned in France today. Fort really dominates the battlefield, doesn't it?
Yes.
Local guide Florence Lamousse explains more.
On the 1st of June of 1916, the Germans decided to attack the fort with a very, very severe assault. There were thousands of soldiers surrounding the fort, all over there, on the top of the fort, in the ditches, everywhere. Inside the fort, there were a few hundred French soldiers. And although the Germans had lots of very efficient weapons, flamethrowers, machine guns, cannons, of course, poison gas, the French resisted. The French did not want to surrender.
The right thing to do would have been to surrender, but these guys,
Yes.
the French, held on for a week under those conditions.
That's the exact truth. Yes, their job was to resist the Germans.
During the rest of June and early July 1916, the Germans threw everything they had at Verdun. By the time the offensive was finally called off in December, the battle intended to bleed France white had also bled Germany white. An estimated 300,000 French and German soldiers were killed during the battle, about the same number on each side. At the center of the battlefield, a vast ossuary honors 130,000 of the French and German soldiers whose shattered bodies were unable to be identified when recovered from the killing fields. It's beautiful. It's like a giant cathedral.
Underneath these tombs are vaults full of bones.
Vaults full of bones
Yes,
under here.
all these soldiers have been buried here. And on the walls you see the names of missing soldiers.
So they don't know who's who, but they know these are the people they're missing, and those are the bones that have been found.
Yes, exactly. This is a sacred place for soldiers and for the families. Let me show you this one. Emmaus de Mailly Émile was a father and his 4 sons.
So
They were all killed in
entire
Verdun.
family.
Yes, with no known grave.
That's sad.
Absolutely.
Small windows in the ossuary allow a glimpse inside the vaults. United in death, the bones of the 130,000 unidentified French and German soldiers lie piled up together, each nationality indistinguishable from the other. Throughout the Battle of Verdun, the French army's only means of supply was a single road that was under constant German attack from all sides. So vital was this lifeline that the French called it the Voie Sacrée, or Sacred Way. 10 miles or so from Verdun, overlooking the Voie Sacrée, the hill of Vauquois was of crucial strategic significance. One side of the hill at Vauquois was controlled by the Germans and the other side by the French. But with neither side able to gain advantage in trench warfare, the most important battles here took place not on top of the hill, but underneath it. I'm shown around by Matt Leonard, an expert on the First World War underground, who takes me to see the tunnels on the French side of the hill.
You can see this narrow gauge railway line. It comes down here towards our entrance. Watch your head here, helmets on, and be careful, there's a number of wooden beams that go across here, so just watch your step a little bit.
They certainly weren't thinking of us tall people when they built
They
this.
weren't, no, they weren't. But it's going to open out a little bit here for you before it narrows as we get deeper again. Here you go, but mind your head anyway of the beams every so often.
All right. What's this here?
This is how the spoil was transported from the face all the way back up to the surface and taken outside and obviously hidden. Here you can see an air pump. You can see these pipes here that go all the way out. This is to feed the guys right down the bottom with fresh air to keep them working.
Okay.
These French systems were going down 30 or 40 meters with a lot of men working down here. The Germans would double that. The French were able to dig about 5 miles of tunnels underneath Vauquois, which is incredible.
Yeah.
What's even more incredible is the Germans dug around 10 miles of tunnels.
Oh my gosh, so it was like a human ant farm down here.
Well, indeed, yeah. It was human beings burrowing into the earth in the 20th century and becoming more like animals the deeper they went. So as we go a bit deeper down here, you can see why this railway was such a great idea.
Yeah.
You can imagine soldiers coming down here banging bags of explosives off the sides of the walls.
I want to set those off too early.
Absolutely. Now, as you can see, off this main incline here, there are many tunnels that branch off this major route, if you like. One of which here you can see on the left-hand side, which is known as a fighting tunnel or an offensive gallery. The purpose of this is to undermine the enemy positions. It goes for around 200 meters down underneath the German positions. And once you get in here, sound becomes paramount because the enemy are listening out for you coming the other way.
Right.
So that was either done by ears pressed up against the wall, or by very complex and technologically advanced listening equipment. Giant, almost stethoscopes, as the doctor would use on your heart. They would be using those on the wall to almost hear the heartbeat of the enemy.
Jeez.
And indeed, this tunnel was used to successfully detonate a mine straight under the German positions. You're talking about several thousand kilograms of explosives going off. And the effect on the Germans, 1 minute they would have been in their trenches suspecting nothing, and the next second they're quite literally atomized. There's nothing left of them whatsoever.
Above ground, the devastation caused by the more than 500 mines that were exploded here a century ago is still very clear. Where the main village street once ran between the former front lines, today there's just a line of craters. A memorial marks the spot where the town hall used to stand.
The actual village would have been about 20 meters above our heads.
Where did all the land go?
It's just completely blown away. We're walking down the side of the crater formed by the largest mine exploded at Vauquois on the 14th of May, 1916. The Germans...
Ginormous.
It's huge. The Germans blew 60 tons of explosives here.
60 tons.
60 tons. Detonated from a depth of 35 meters. There were 108 French soldiers killed instantly. It's almost unexplainable, isn't it?
Yeah.
And this was a major part of the First World War. Indeed, at the height of operations in 1916, the British had some 50 to 60,000 people just involved in tunnelling and underground warfare.
That's one country of many.
That's just one country. And this was going on all along the Western Front. It was the only real way of trying to get round the intransigence of trench warfare. If you couldn't go over the top, you had to go underneath.
All too regularly, however, the generals did order their troops over the top into murderous machine gun fire. The death toll was often appallingly high. At the Battle of the Somme, for example, launched on July 1st, 1916, nearly 20,000 British soldiers were killed on the first morning, making it the bloodiest day in British military history. 3 weeks later, in a diversionary attack to try to draw German troops away from the Battle of the Somme, Allied soldiers were again sent over the top at Fromelles, 50 miles to the north. This time, it would be the Australian military's bloodiest day in history. Hey, Graham.
Hey, g'day, Zay. How you doing, mate?
Hey, you're an Aussie.
Yeah, Aussie as they come, yeah.
I meet up with Graham Archer from Spirit of Remembrance Tours for a look around the Fromelles battlefield.
The Australians, this was their first ever action on the Western Front in World War I, and it was an absolute and utter disaster. This was one of the most heavily fortified German positions along the whole of the Western Front.
Look how thick it is.
Yeah, well, you're talking about a fortification that was 8 to 8 feet thick. The Aussie gunners shelled for around about 7 hours, 200,000 rounds all around here, but
Didn't even put a dent.
didn't even dent them.
Better to be on the defense on this war.
Absolutely. I'll take you up the top and have a look. So if you look out over here, this is a field of fire. Across this, the Australians had to advance. There's an absolute swathe of machine gun fire. The Australians keep coming and coming and coming, and they're cut down as they come. 5,500 dead and dying. This field is covered in bodies, and for what? Not 1 yard was taken. This battle achieved nothing. It's just a footnote in history, but to Australians, this is hallowed ground.
A century ago, most of the Australian dead recovered from the battlefield were buried here in this cemetery, but not all of them. Just recently, a mile or so away, a mass grave of around 250 unidentified Australian soldiers was discovered in this field next to Pheasant Wood, where they had been buried by the Germans after the battle. In 2010, they were reburied at the brand new Pheasant Wood Cemetery, the first Commonwealth war grave cemetery to be created since the Second World War. It's beautiful.
It's gorgeous, isn't it?
Yeah.
And all of the soldiers from the mass grave are buried here, including over 100 now that have been identified.
So how do they identify these?
Predominantly through DNA testing, through the relatives, through the DNA samples that they put in, and also through personal artefacts that they found on the bodies. So amazing detective job. Amazing
Must be great
work.
for the families to finally get to...
Finally get closure.
Yeah.
3 generations on.
The huge death toll in 1916 at battles like Fromelles, the Somme, and Verdun led the Allies to redouble their efforts to invent a new weapon that could break through the formidable German frontline defenses. Soon, the British had a potentially game-changing secret new weapon ready for action. In November 1917, it was first used on a mass scale at the Battle of Cambrai. The new invention was initially called the land ship. We know it better today as the tank. Designed to resist machine gun fire and to smash through even the strongest defenses, tanks initially looked like achieving a breakthrough at Cambrai. But once the Germans recovered from their surprise at this fearful new weapon, they were able to halt the advance. Just outside Cambrai, at a battlefield memorial near the village of Flequier, I meet up with local tank expert Philippe Gorshinsky.
You helped build this monument, right? With a group of friends, we have decided to establish that monument in the very heart of the battlefield of Cambrai.
I have to say, it's one of the most curious monuments I've ever seen. These are tank tracks, right?
Tank track, and they go towards Cambrai.
So the Battle of Cambrai actually saw the first mass tank attack ever.
Yes. 476 tanks were ready to go into action.
Almost 500 tanks coming in.
Yes, and all from that horizon line towards our position. But as soon as the tanks were starting to approach, they were destroyed each after the others.
This is where they were attacked.
It was a turning in the story of the Battle of Cambrai here.
As a result of German artillery fire, 40 of the British tanks were destroyed around Flequier, 4 of them in this one field. Remarkably, a century later, the local farmer still plows up tank debris every year.
Look, here you have a bolt that was used to fix the iron plate of the tank, a buckle that was probably from one part of the equipment of one of the crew, And that thing, which is very interesting, this is a fragment of a 6-pounder shell. That was a shell which was fired by a tank. And probably the tank was destroyed and it has burnt and some of the shell has exploded inside the tank.
That's amazing. They're resurfacing after 100 years.
Yes.
Hidden away in an ordinary-looking barn in Flequier is one of the First World War's most remarkable relics, unearthed by Philippe a few years ago in a field just outside the village.
Oh, you found this?
Yes, it was buried under 2 meters of earth.
That is extraordinary.
Oh, yes.
That is a beast. I mean, imagine what the Germans must have thought, seeing this coming right at them.
It was a terrifying sight, I think.
What was it like for the crew inside this thing?
Oh, for the crew, it was also a bad story. It was completely dark. There were also the noise of the engine, which was terrible. The noise of the bullets, we were clanging on the side of the tank. The temperature was 45 degrees.
That's like 120 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yes, yes.
Oh.
These earliest tanks were extremely primitive, and as a result of their very slow top speed of just 4 miles per hour, they were highly vulnerable to artillery fire.
If you look here, you can see the damage done by one of the shell, which completely enters the tank from there. It went through the tanks, and it explodes when you reach the other side. And now...
Whoa! Wow! That's horrific. Were there any survivors?
Out of the 8 men crew, 5 were killed.
Was the tank effective? Did it change the course of the war?
After the quality of the tank were improved, we can say that tanks, they make the war shorter. When it was asked to a German officer who won the First World War, he replied, General Tank.
So we should thank the tank.
Yes, and those who were inside.
The potential of modern technology to break the long stalemate of trench warfare was clear. Towards the end of the war, the recently invented aeroplane also began to play an increasingly important role. When the war started, the British had just 30 aircraft. Many cavalry commanders opposed their use on the grounds that their noise would frighten the horses. By the war's end, however, the number of British planes was over 20,000. Today, one of the best places to see surviving World War I aircraft is the annual air show at La Ferté-Alais near Paris. The earliest warplanes were adapted for battle from aircraft built in peacetime, like this French Maran Type H, built in 1913.
Gorgeous plane.
Oh, yeah.
So this is the replica of the one that first flew across the Mediterranean
Absolutely,
successfully.
with Roland Garros, 1913. When the war occurs, they had to put a machine gun on there.
And how did they shoot through the propeller?
They just put a deflector, iron deflector on the blade.
Okay.
And after 2 or 3 problems, they had a working thing.
So what do you mean by problems?
Well, they cut off the propeller and...
They're shooting their own propeller off.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Did holes. Wah, wah, wah.
So it didn't work right away.
It didn't work right away.
They're trying to shoot the enemy, but they're shooting themselves down. At the time, it was up to date, but not really fit for war when this was built.
It was absolutely not made for war.
Between 1914 and 1918, airplanes were rapidly improved and eventually became formidable weapons. In addition to the airplanes on display at the show, a group of guys are playing the part of some of the war's top fighter aces, including the most famous of them all, Germany's Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen.
In order to be an ace, you have to have 5 kills, don't you?
5 kills,
Right.
yes.
How many kills did you have?
80 in about 2 years of fight.
80 kills. That makes you the top ace of World War I.
Right.
Wow. Congratulations. Originally, planes just kind of surveyed the area, didn't they? They weren't actually fighting in the
Yes,
air.
because nobody think to fight there. Just taking the plane, flying, taking pictures, that's all. English pilot, French pilot, cross German pilot and salute them.
Yeah.
Say hello.
Yeah.
They have no gun.
No idea. You were just seeing each other.
What do they want to do? Hello.
Up in the air, the planes demonstrate the dramatic maneuvers that back in the war were a matter of life and death.
fly like that is unbelievable, but to do that while you're fighting in a war.
Airplanes and other modern weaponry like tanks had a big impact on the war. But one of the most significant of all the factors that helped the Allies towards victory was the late entry into the war of the USA. By summer 1918, nearly 1.5 million U.S. troops arrived in Europe, ready for action. With numbers now in their favor, the Allies launched a full-scale attack on the strategically crucial German defenses known as the Hindenburg Line. One of the most important battles in this final offensive, which helped force the Germans towards surrender, was launched near San Quentin on September 29, 1918. Many of the United States soldiers who died in the battle are buried at the Somme American Cemetery. Unlike overseas military cemeteries of other nations, those of the United States are cared for by live-in staff. I meet up with Cemetery Superintendent Eric Barker.
Hey, good morning, Zay.
Morning.
Welcome to our Somme American Cemetery.
Thank you. It's a beautiful place.
If you're ready, we'll go visit our war dead we honor here.
Yeah. How many American soldiers are buried here?
We have 1,844 buried here. In all of our cemeteries, the burials are random. So you'll find a colonel next to a private. Because we believe everyone is equal in death. The only burials that are side by side are brothers and friends. And that was by request of the families. And right here we have one of our sets of brothers, the Vetter brothers. One of the brothers actually lied so he can be in the army with his brother. He was too young to join. This brother here was killed not too far from about 200 meters here on the Hindenburg Line assault.
This was the actual battlefield.
You're standing on the battlefield.
During the attack on the 29th September 1918, James Vetter's 107th Infantry suffered more casualties in a single day than any other U.S. regiment during the war. The Hindenburg Line in this sector was very strongly defended. Beyond the German front lines, there were second and third lines of defenses. The most important barrier the Americans had to cross was the San Quentin Canal.
I could see why that would be pretty difficult to cross.
That's why the ground on top of the tunnel was so important for us to take.
Right.
So we wouldn't have to try to cross this canal.
Sure.
There was an entire German division housed inside that tunnel, completely safe from all the bombardment we were sending over.
I don't get it. How were they living on the water? Just in the tunnel, you know what I mean?
The Germans had barges end to end, 4 miles throughout the entire tunnel. They also had rooms inside the tunnel. They had additional attack tunnels that would go up to the surface. So whenever we would pass, they would come out of these tunnels and shoot us from behind, causing mass confusion. It was an extremely difficult objective, which cost a lot of American lives.
After a bloody battle, the tunnel was finally captured, and the canal along with it. Within just a few hours on the 29th September 1918, the Hindenburg Line had been broken, and victory was now in sight. Over the next month, under British, French, and American attack, the Germans retreated to Belgium, from where they had advanced 4 years earlier. Curiously, it was at Mons, where British troops had fought their first battle of the war in August 1914, that British and Commonwealth troops also fought their last battle of the war. Shockingly, it took place on Armistice Day, when the Germans had already agreed to surrender.
The armistice was signed just after 5 a.m. on the 11th of November, 1918. But it was decided to leave the exact moment of the ceasefire until 11 a.m., so there'd be enough time to get the message to the troops on the front line. And because stopping the war at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month had a certain ring to it. As a result, over 10,000 soldiers were killed or wounded on the war's final day. This may not look like a historic spot, but right here is where the very last Allied soldier of the war was killed. 25-year-old Canadian Private George Price, shot by a German sniper at 10:58 a.m., just 2 minutes before the ceasefire. 2 minutes.
Close to where he died, George Price is buried in the lovely Saint-Symphorien Cemetery, where unusually Allied and German soldiers are buried side by side. Also unusual about this cemetery is that here the war comes full circle, from the first days of the war to the last.
Here's the grave of the last British soldier to have been killed in the war, Private George Ellison, shot at 9:30 a.m. just an hour and a half before the ceasefire. And ironically, over here, directly opposite, is the first British soldier to die in the war, Private John Parr, on the 21st of August, 1914. It's shocking to think that in the 4 years between their two deaths, almost 1 million British and Commonwealth soldiers had been killed. And the French, German, and other armies were similarly decimated, making the total military death toll close to 10 million. And for what? This was supposed to be the war to end all wars. If only it had.